The title of tonight's talk is Becoming Nobody, Going Nowhere. At a retreat at my house on New Year's Day, a friend pulled this book off the bookshelves of my house. It's a book by a woman named Aya Kema. She was a nun in the Theravadan Buddhist tradition, which in fact is the tradition that we are in. It's the tradition that was the home of mindfulness practice. And Aya Kema, a German woman, died in the 1980s, but her teachings are still really influential today. The book is an old one. You know, I had it up on that shelf for years, and I haven't looked at it for a long, long time. Not until Ginger pulled it down, in fact. And I thought, being nobody, going nowhere. That's a pretty dramatic title, isn't it? You know, I think that for a whole lot of us, we would so much rather hear a title like The Way to Peace and Happiness, or Cultivating Joy. I have a book at home by the poet Hafiz called The Subject Tonight is Love. What a wonderful title, you know. But being nobody, going nowhere, you know, this is not wonderful. This doesn't seem to be wonderful. In fact, it sounds grim. Still, you know, this kept whispering to me and telling me there's something here that you need to talk about. So this is tonight's talk. This is what I'm doing tonight. I would like to say that being nobody, going nowhere, is in fact the same as the way to joy and happiness. It's not different. It's a very, very different way of describing the same reality. It's like we can describe the sun in all different kinds of ways, right? You know, a yellow face, a bright yellow ball, a medium-sized star, or all kinds of ways. Same thing about this profound reality that's being pointed to. Being nobody, going nowhere. Or the subject tonight is love. They are the same. I'm going to invite you tonight, then, to just allow what's being said just to kind of resonate with you. This isn't, in a way, something that we need to figure out intellectually. It's something that you know, that your heart knows if you listen, if you allow it to listen. And for some of us, that may be easier than others, not to get upset if it just boggles the mind, you know, like being nobody, going nowhere, and the subject tonight is love, like sound like two different animals, totally. Maybe that's where you are. But maybe you'll begin to hear that there is some kind of, they're both pointing to the same thing. So I'm going to start by reading a poem by the Sufi poet Hafiz. It's called Tripping Over Joy. And in this poem, the poet refers to God and to the beloved. Now, if you've got trouble with the word God or the beloved, don't use that word. Translate in your mind. Well, maybe what's divine, or what's sacred, or what's mysterious, or use whatever words substitute. Kind of makes sense for you. Don't let the word catch you up. So here it is. What is the difference between your experience and that of a saint? The saint knows that the spiritual path is a sublime chess game with God, and that the beloved has made such a fantastic move that the saint is now continually tripping over joy and bursting out in laughter and saying, I surrender. Whereas, my dear, I'm afraid you still think you have 1,000 serious moves. Now, if your reaction to this poem is, well, so what's the fantastic move that the beloved's making? Or, wait a minute, I don't think I have 1,000 serious moves, I have less than that. If that's your reaction, I'm going to ask you to just kind of maybe let go of the literal content here and see if you can follow the movement. I'm going to read it once again. What is the difference between your experience and that of a saint? The saint knows that the spiritual path is a sublime chess game with God, and that the beloved has just made such a fantastic move, that the saint is now continually tripping over joy and bursting out in laughter and saying, I surrender. Whereas, my dear, I'm afraid you still think you have 1,000 serious moves. Being nobody, going nowhere. That's the saint. No more moves. Knowing there are no more moves. Surrendering and letting go. Laughter and joy. You know, in society, we learn just the opposite, right? We have 1,000 serious moves in our lives in society. There's no end to them. You do one, you got another 1,000 waiting for you, right? They're always there in society. I think that we can say that in society, we are in somebody training all the time. We're somebodies in society. Everybody is a somebody and striving to get somewhere. It's a really intense course that we are learning in society. And we're all trying hard, really hard, to be happy. And maybe we each have different definitions of what happiness is. You know, maybe it's having everything in our life we want, and maybe it's being responsible, or maybe it is caring well for our family and our spouse, or maybe it's a lot of animals, or doing good deeds, or whatever your definition. We're really all trying to do this really, really hard. And I think we have a general social assumption that the more we do, the better it is. More is better. It's simple kind of calculus. More is better. And that's wrong. More is not always better. And in fact, profoundly, we're not happy. To be dependent on circumstances and getting together all of our serious moves is a very problematic proposition. Because one move slips and whoops, problem. Always a problem. Life changes on a dime and we all know it. And yet the paradox is that we keep going after the same thing, even though we know it's not going to bring us ultimately into a sense of happiness that we all like. There are all these moves. We've got all these moves. Okay, let me finish this one. And this one too. And we kind of go, always going on. Then I'll figure it out, Then I'll take some time and maybe get happy, maybe. So we are in society, we are somebodies. And somebodies are always going somewhere. That is, we've got all these moves. We identify with what we are doing. We think that these are critical to our fulfillment. Or, at very least, we think that we need them to have some kind of control over life, right? I'm going to do this, this, and this, and get my life kind of in order. Otherwise, it would be chaos. Do you know this one? I think it's familiar to many of us. Familiar to many of us. I think at least those of you who are a little older have heard about, during the Great Depression, the people who jumped out of windows when their businesses failed. Maybe some of you, the younger ones, have never heard of that, but it did happen. And I raise that now because it occurred to me that, I think we're somewhat like those industrialists or major businessmen who, when they found their business failed, felt they had no option but to jump out the window. We often jump out of the window, not literally, but emotionally speaking, when some of our serious moves. Don't go right. Don't we go emotionally into the pits? That's human. It's human on one hand. But let us just notice what indeed we're doing. How like those businessmen whose businesses failed. We've identified so thoroughly with whatever is going on in our life that we don't say, as the saint does, I surrender. It's like, no way, this is terrible. And it may be. But just listening to the difference. Hafiz got it, didn't he? We have 1,000 serious moves. Whereas the saint can say, I surrender. I think that we are very far from the little bird that can just sit there in the sunlight and blink, kind of looking around, no place to go, nothing to do. I think we're very far from the saint who says, I surrender. Oh, my business just failed, I surrender. Or when Jesus said, consider the lilies of the field. They need to spin their toil. And say, wait a minute, but I've got an awful lot of spinning and toiling going on in my life. So how do we reconcile these? We do. We have lots of spinning and toiling going on in our life. How do we reconcile that? I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But first I'd like to point out that history is full of somebodies. Right? People who've done things that involve great power or influence or made a huge contribution. You know, Caesar, Alexander the Great, Cleopatra, Bill Gates, people that we have all heard about. They're somebodies, according to history. And a few decades ago, I will say historians then began looking at those people that we never hear about and kind of investigating their lives and recognizing these too are of value. But when you look at it closely, you realize, oh, even the people that we don't know about in terms of their names, they too consider themselves somebodies with plans in their lives and serious moves. In society, we're all somebodies, I think, by and large. And the same is true in literature. It's chock full of somebodies doing things with plans, identified with their plans. And the more we look from this particular perspective of somebodies and nobodies, we recognize, just about everybody is somebodying. Does that make sense? Just about everybody is somebodying, whether it's in history or literature or wherever it is. These are all somebody's doing in their moves, and some are successful, hugely successful, some are not. But they're all somebody's attached to their moves. And the problem is that people suffer because they're somebodying. The 1,000 serious moves don't finally make us happy. So what's the alternative? Nobodying is the alternative. And this is what Hafiz, the poet, is saying. To train so that we too can laugh. We're tripping over joy. And we all know it's not easy. It's not easy to do. I looked at this book, and again, the title of it is Being Nobody, Going Nowhere. And it occurred to me that Ayakema, the nun who had trained for decades, she knew she was nobody. She knew she was nobody. She also knew that she had been nobody all along, but hadn't recognized it. Because, in fact, we are all nobodies all along, but don't know it. And the difference is that in training, as a result of our training, we come to that recognition. Hey, wait a minute, it's been here all along. That's why while the title of her book is Being Nobody, Going Nowhere, I've changed the title of the talk to Becoming Nobody, Going Nowhere. because that's what we're in the process of doing. We're in the process of becoming nobodies, which in fact we already are. Doesn't make sense logically, but just hear what this is pointing to. We're in training. We're in training here. And what is standing in the way of our knowing that we're nobodies already are our fears and our doubts and our attachment to our thousand serious moves. Not the moves themselves. That's okay. We're all going to have to, we make moves, we have to live. But to think that they are to seriously attach to them. I think we can say that Aya Kema was cooked, and that is, she was done. She knew that she was nobody. We here, we're in the cooking. We're in process. At all different stages of the process. You know, some of us are pretty raw, pretty tough still. And others of us are more tender. But we're all in the process. If you're in this training, even if you don't express it like this, I will tell you that you are in nobody training. You may not like that idea. Doesn't matter. Don't worry about it. This is what, in fact, is going on. Very, very subtly, we are learning to free ourselves. And as we become freer, we become less of somebodies and more of who we truly are. More in the place where we can laugh freely and simply be, as Jesus said, like the lilies of the field. I don't remember the rest of it. God in all His glory arrayed like these, or something like that. Well, we don't have to claim that we are arrayed like a lily of the field, but we're going in that direction. Going in that direction in this training. So I will say that, I just mentioned that history really is about somebody's. It doesn't notice those who are nobodying, those involved in nobodyhood. This is off the radar screen of history. Such people, from the point of view of history, really don't count. The only time they generally refer to somebody who is in training to become nobody is when they do something, like, for example, there are Tibetan monks right now who are immolating themselves in China in protest of Chinese policies. This gets a little bit of news. Not a lot, but a little. But their inner struggles to become free, these are not really reportable. Why? Because history deals with, what shall we call it, facts. It deals with the world of phenomena, of what happens in time and place. This inner struggle is not about time and place. In fact, it's about being right here, right now, isn't it? You can't quantify it in the same way. It's about being present. How do you get a story out of that? It's really not a whole lot of a story to talk about. That's the whole point. It just isness. It's about being. And I'm speaking and spending some time talking about history simply because I think this is the way we commonly think. We think about it in terms of past, present, and future. We have a historical perspective. But the perspective from our point of view of our training is not about past, present, and future. It's right here. It's right now. It's about being nobody, going nowhere. I would say that many years ago, I actually taught history. So I've had a lot of time to think about what history is and what history isn't. I was never comfortable with it. just kind of had to manufacture an enthusiasm over it. I knew there was something else, something that I was yearning for, and it wasn't history. And it's so interesting how this works, because what I was yearning for kept pulling me closer and closer to it in a way, so that finally it began to show up in my teaching. And finally it got my attention. And I will say it finally got my attention. I was teaching a course on U.S.-Japanese relations, post-World War II. Now, U.S.-Japanese relations post-World War II are mainly about trade relations, which as far as I was concerned were just utterly boring. It was really boring. And I ended up telling the students that in order to understand U.S.-Japanese relations, we had to meditate. At the beginning of every class, we spent several minutes meditating. Well, even I got the point that this is ridiculous. I'm teaching the wrong thing. And I quit teaching. I left that life behind. It was such a relief. And I'm mentioning this now because I will say that this was a movement toward nobody-ing. This was an expression of letting go of one of my 1,000 serious moves. You see, I have a degree in international relations. I was teaching at a university. I mean, that's somebody-ing, isn't it? It kind of was. Letting it go. Just recognize it, this isn't right. And I can tell you that it was enormously affirming, empowering. I didn't at the time say, okay, this was nobody-ing, but that's in fact, this is what it was, a movement in that direction. Again, quoting Hafiz, he said, always exercise your heart's knowing. You might as well attempt something real along the path. Always exercise your heart's knowing. You might as well attempt something real along the path. I realized that my teaching U.S.-Japanese relations wasn't real. Not for me, anyway. It wasn't real for me. So nobody training, that's what it's about. Now, you don't have to become a monk, sit at the foot of a tree, or meditate all your life to be a nobody training. The place to do it is right here, right now, in your own life. That's all. It's so simple. Right here, right now, in your own life. It's the only place to recognize, in fact, that you already are nobody. But if that hasn't yet begun to be a glimmer for you, keep at it. Wherever you are, in the midst of your family and your work or whatever you're doing, that's the place to train. Nobody training involves shifting gears. Shifting gears from the perspective that I've got all these moves, all these serious things I've got to do, to simply doing them for their own sake. The Vietnamese monk Thich Nhat Hanh said there are two ways to wash the dishes. The first is to wash the dishes in order to have clean dishes. The second is to wash the dishes in order to wash the dishes. Do you hear that? The first is to wash the dishes in order to have clean dishes. And the second is to wash the dishes in order to wash the dishes. The second is the way of someone in nobody training. It's not about ticking off our list, each move. Oops, I got this, although we may have lists. But simply not to treat things as an object that need to be accomplished, but to be in the flow of it, in the context of it. Letting go of 1,000 serious moves. As we progress in this training, we find that nobody-ing, the practice of it, is very easeful. It's very comfortable, the practice is. You begin to recognize, you know what? I don't have to prove anything to anybody. I can simply be. I think most of us are really concerned, right? Am I good enough? And then you fill in the blank with whatever it is. And of course we want to be effective at what we're doing, naturally. But so much of our lives is about proving it to ourselves, but also to others. By golly, how does this look to others? In nobody training, you begin to realize, you know what? That's not the point. The point is just being. What a relief. It's a huge relief to just recognize, to just do the dishes in order to do the dishes. To drop all the angst we have surrounding what we do. Is it good enough? How am I going to look? Et cetera, et cetera. Nowhere to go, just being. And so we begin to recognize in no-body training, and again, I'll quote Hafiz, who said that life, he called it life, and he called it, it's just a mid-air flight of golden wine between his pitcher and his cup. Again, he said, all I know of life and myself is that we are just a mid-air flight of golden wine between his pitcher and his cup. Nobodies. Just nobodies. I would like to point out that Buddhist training in our tradition, is not about becoming a Buddhist. It's about becoming nobody, which in fact we already are. I should close on that utterly obscure statement. Becoming nobody, which in fact we already are. So I hope from these few comments, if at the beginning when I said becoming nobody, going nowhere, it sounded a little grim and drastic, I hope maybe you have a little bit of a different perspective on it now. Maybe it's not quite so grim or quite so drastic. And now I want to go back to this book, Becoming Nobody, Being Nobody, Going Nowhere. This is actually a manual, a teaching of an outline and a very perceptive, incisive comments on the Buddha's teaching. The central teaching of the Buddha is called the Four Noble Truths. And what I plan to do in the following talks, in fact at least the following 4 talks, is I'm going to devote each of those talks to one of the 4 Noble Truths. Part of this will be to show how these truths are part of nobody training. And each evening, when we focus on one of the Noble Truths, I'm inviting people from our group, I think it'll probably be 3 a night, to come up and share with you in short talks, like 5 minutes each. A few of you I'm asking to come up and share your experience and insights around that particular, the truth of the evening, I guess you'd say, to share your experience and insights. I think when your voices are heard, this can be so supportive and so helpful to everybody else. You know, sometimes we get the idea that we're out here all alone. We can see other bodies sitting here, but to really hear what some of the issues are and what people have learned, I think this is so supportive. So that's what we're going to be doing, the 4 Noble Truths, and people from the group will be sharing at that time. I'd like to conclude now and invite you to consider for yourself what it would mean if you didn't think you had 1,000 serious moves. What would it mean in your life if you didn't feel that you had 1,000 serious moves? It's not about the absence of responsibility, not about dropping everything and go living in a monastery or a cave or an island in the tropics. but rather right in the middle of your life, how would that shift your life? If you didn't feel everything had to be accomplished or else your life wouldn't be fulfilled. So that's the invitation, to hold that question in your mind and your heart. What would it mean if I didn't think I had 1,000 serious moves? What kind of difference might that make in my life? So thank you for listening. So let me ask you for any comments or questions about this topic. Yes, Jackie.
I was just thinking about, knowing that Harry Belafonte is downtown tonight giving a really valuable presentation, and I was just wondering if perhaps people can be experiencing their nobodiness and we attach the somebodyness to it. Because I can think of people that history might point out to us as having quite an effect on our life, that they themselves are not driven by that definition of self.
Absolutely. Like thinking of someone maybe like Gandhi. There are saints. They are among us, and some of them are effective. But it's not that being driven by being somebody, but simply being. Thank you. Yes.
And perhaps we just make the somebodyness around it out
of course.
Small understanding.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Our small understanding. This is really asking us, open our mind and our hearts to something bigger. Thank you. Anybody? Yes, Ginny.
Earlier about the gentleman who made all the silly movies earlier in his life, and he ended up donating from Yeah, and this movie I Am about the power of when you give your heart to help somebody who needs your help, how uplifting that is. He became a nobody.
Yes.
Only by facing other people committed suicide, and they went through this after trauma and with the head injury that he went through. But instead of committing suicide, he ended up going to his daddy, who's helped him through his hospital all his life. He said, "Man, you helped so many people. How do you do it?" And his daddy said, "It's just love." And he just used to feel that. And it's beautiful. And the movie is just, it elevates your heart.
Thank you, Ginny. Yeah. I am. And for us not to hop on to the conclusion that people who are helping others are nobodying. You can help someone else in order to fulfill a need within you for recognition or for people to say you are a wonderful person or whatever. And I have a story of someone who was a hospice nurse who told a story, out in California, LA, she told a story that she was the nurse for a man who was quite well known in Hollywood circles, who was dying. And she gave a big party for him right at the end of life, inviting all of his friends, these Hollywood luminaries. She went to a huge amount of trouble. Party was a huge success. And the next day she went and talked to me. She said, "How did you like it? How was it?" And he was silent for a moment. And then he says, "What do you want? A medal?" And I give her great credit. She told the story in a group, and she said yes. That was what she wanted. She wanted a medal. So we need to always watch. Why are we doing what we're doing? Yes. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, Ginger.
I'm getting confused by semantics.
Okay.
Here. And when you were talking about people in history, right away a number of names came into my mind, like Teresa of Avila, or Mother Teresa, or Martin Luther King, or Hafiz, or the Buddha, who were maybe all nobodies, but to society made them somebody.
Absolutely.
And I'm wondering if by becoming a nobody, does that make us somebody who's a nobody?
No, you've never been a somebody. No, that's true, but no, and not to worry about it. You're letting your mind get too involved in this. Simply with an open heart, we undertake this training, knowing it is leading us somewhere that is safe and joyful. And what happens externally in our life, whatever it may be, is going to happen. We try to make it as beautiful, as wholesome, and as effective as possible. And it may be going to happen like that, and maybe it's going to just fizzle. We don't know. And we just move with an open heart. How history and others look at us, or others, maybe history's never going to notice this, how others look at us is not our concern.
There's a phrase, and I don't know if it was from my Catholic upbringing or what, but it's something about to be Christian or spiritual or something, or Jesus Christ was, how does it go? In this world, but not of this world?
Yeah,
something like that.
That's right.
And it seems to me that even trying to become a nobody, not of this world, we are still in this world.
That's right. That's the paradox.
Yeah.
That's the paradox. Remember, I've said in the process of this talk, we already are nobodies. We truly are. There's just this mid-air flight of golden wine between his pitcher and his cup. That's what we are. But what happens when we get here is we get all involved and identified, and this is what the Buddha was talking about, his Four Noble Truths, which we'll be talking about in the future, and we talk about all the time here. So it's a tremendous paradox, and this is the beauty, I think, of meeting together as we do, because it helps remind us and put us straight. We are in the midst of such life is complex. Human life is complex. We're embodied beings, and we do have things to do. How do we maintain this perspective? How do we maintain a view of what's true? And it's not that we are not here and that we're not of this world, because we both are of this world and not of this world, both at the same time. Paradox. What does that mean? So this is what we do here and with our practice. Keep finding out what this means. Thanks. Anybody else? Yes.
I'm struggling with it. I love what you said, and I found what you said very free as an adult. I have two young children that I try to translate some of these things to, and I struggle with it because I'm constantly reinforcing that they are somebody, and they will be somebody. And so now I've found this language is telling me it's so great to be nobody. I'm not really sure how to kind of express that to a 7 or a 6-year-old, and because I found freedom in what you said, and I'd like to be able to convey that.
Yeah. I would suggest do not tell your children that they are nobodies. Not a good idea. What you can do is you simply embody this truth, but it's way too soon to try to convey that. And it's interesting. What?
We're teaching them that culture.
Yeah.
That's what we're.
But embodying to the best you can what this truth actually means, and parenting as best you can. Not getting into nobodies at this point. It's too soon. Yeah. Anybody else have a comment or question? Well, thank you very much for coming. We'll see you next week.